People assume silence is just empty space, nothing happening, nothing meaningful, but yours wasn't empty at all. It was the very first time this avoidant person had to sit with themselves, completely alone, without anyone left to blame, chase, or push away. And inside that quiet, something happened that they were never prepared for. They finally caught a glimpse of exactly what they had spent years, maybe their whole life, running from. Your silence breaks the unhealthy relationship cycle by removing the pursuit and emotional reactions the avoidant person relied on to avoid accountability. Without someone to blame or chase, they are left alone with their own patterns, forcing uncomfortable self-reflection. Whether this leads to genuine growth or simply temporary discomfort depends on their willingness to change, but your quiet strength and healthy boundaries shift the dynamic completely, allowing you to choose peace over repeating the same painful cycle. This unfamiliar response generates real emotional tension inside them. They expected pursuit and instead got silence. They expected some kind of reaction and instead found boundaries. They expected you to make the breakup about your own pain, but instead you simply stepped back. This mismatch forces their defensive mind to start asking questions it can't easily answer. Why didn't you chase after them? Why didn't you fight to keep them? Were you actually done long before they even realized what was happening? Did their behavior finally push things too far? These questions linger in their mind precisely because their old answers no longer fit this new situation. Your silence also removes a specific kind of attention the avoidant person didn't even realize they had come to depend on. Even though they act like closeness isn't something they need, your care, your presence, your emotional investment was quietly feeding something inside them the whole time. When that gets suddenly removed, they feel the resulting emptiness. Without your validation, without your emotional energy, without your steady involvement in their life, they experience a kind of loss they never would have admitted they were even capable of feeling. If they allow themselves to actually sit with this discomfort instead of immediately chasing after someone new to fill the void, they might notice that their so-called independence isn't nearly as satisfying as they always claimed it was. Silence also denies them a target to direct their anger or blame toward. Avoidant people often turn to anger during periods of distance or after a breakup because anger helps them sidestep the softer, more vulnerable emotions sitting underneath it. But when you don't engage, when you're simply not present to fight with or defend yourself against, their anger has nowhere left to land. Over time it fades, and what remains underneath are deeper truths, sadness, regret, and the slow realization that they pushed away someone who genuinely cared about them. Your silence gives them the emotional room to move past their usual defenses and actually reach the feelings they typically spend their whole life avoiding. At first, they might feel a sense of relief in your absence, convincing themselves it proves they genuinely prefer being alone. Then they might slip into a kind of self-righteousness, telling themselves your silence proves you never really cared in the first place. But as days turn into weeks with no message, no attempt to reconnect, no sign that you're sitting around waiting for them, something starts to shift. They begin to feel the permanence of your absence settling in. They start comparing new people to you and coming up empty every time. They start noticing how their same behavior keeps repeating with every new partner. They start recognizing the real cost of their patterns. These realizations only surface because your silence removed every distraction they used to rely on to avoid facing the truth. The discomfort that shows up when nobody is chasing them anymore is one of the most powerful psychological experiences an avoidant person can go through. Their entire relational dynamic has always been built around other people pursuing them. They pull away and someone tries to reconnect. They create distance and someone else does the emotional labor of keeping the relationship alive. This dynamic let them stay emotionally safe, maintain control, and avoid vulnerability altogether. Your silence destroys that entire pattern. When no one is chasing anymore, when your energy is gone, when your heart is no longer reaching toward them, the avoidant person experiences a kind of helplessness they're deeply unfamiliar with. They're used to holding all the power, deciding when connection happens, deciding when it ends, deciding when to come back around. But when you stop seeking them out, when you're no longer emotionally available to them, that power simply evaporates. If they want connection now, they'd actually have to pursue it themselves. This alone feels terrifying to someone who has spent their life avoiding emotional exposure. Pursuing you means risking rejection. It means admitting they actually want something. It means stepping into the exact position of emotional vulnerability they've avoided their entire life. This reversal is deeply uncomfortable for them, but it's also incredibly revealing. For the first time, they get to feel exactly what their partners felt the entire time, wanting connection and simply not receiving it. Your silence also strips away the validation they had quietly come to rely on. Your interest in them made them feel desirable, important, valued. When that interest disappears, they feel the loss in ways that genuinely shake their self-image. They're forced to confront the insecurity hiding underneath their avoidant mask. They see, maybe for the first time, that they do actually need connection. They do care what other people think of them, and they are affected by someone's absence, whether they want to admit it or not. This truth contradicts everything they've told themselves and everyone around them about being entirely self-sufficient and emotionally untouchable. Realizing that they actually mattered to someone forces them to face a part of themselves they've kept locked away for a long time. They also have to sit with the uncertainty of where they now actually stand with you. When you used to pursue them, they always knew they could come back whenever it was convenient for them. Your silence removes that safety net entirely. They don't know if you're truly done for good. They don't know if you'd even respond if they reached out. They don't know if the door has closed completely. That uncertainty carries an emotional weight they genuinely don't know how to manage. And now, without the familiar chase, without the rhythm they used to control so effortlessly, without the emotional pattern they always relied on, they can no longer predict the outcome or steer the connection in whatever direction suits them. You hold the power now. Your silence became the final boundary, the exact moment everything shifted, the point where their defenses stopped being able to protect them from themselves. You're the one who now decides where or if reconnection happens, and you're the one quietly holding the power over whether the relationship continues in any form whatsoever. This shift in power feels extremely unsettling for someone whose entire emotional defense system is built around maintaining control through distance and avoiding real closeness. When they lose even a small piece of that control, it shakes the ground beneath them in ways they simply don't know how to handle. This discomfort becomes even more obvious once the avoidant person starts paying far more attention to you than before. While you were the one chasing them, while you were openly expressing your interest, they never had to question where they stood with you. They never had to wonder whether you cared or whether you were available, because your actions kept reassuring them constantly, without them ever needing to ask. But your silence takes away that automatic reassurance, and suddenly they find themselves checking your social media, quietly asking mutual friends how you've been, trying to gather information about your life, who you're spending time with, and whether someone else might have taken their place. This kind of watchful behavior is something they probably never imagined themselves engaging in, yet here they are doing exactly that, because your absence is creating an anxiety they never experienced back when you were constantly available. The roles have flipped completely. They've become the one wondering, the one seeking, the one trying to understand something they no longer have easy access to. And this reversal forces them to sit with feelings they never wanted to feel in the first place. Your silence also removes all the emotional noise that the push-pull cycle used to generate. While they were busy managing your interest, keeping you at arm's length, pushing you away, and then pulling you back close just enough to prevent you from actually leaving, their attention stayed locked on the mechanics of the dynamic rather than its actual meaning. They never had to look at their own patterns because they were too preoccupied responding to you. They never had to ask themselves why they behaved this way because their focus stayed fixed on controlling the closeness between you both instead of questioning their own behavior. But once you step completely outside the dynamic, once you stop chasing, stop trying, stop feeding them emotional fuel, something unexpected happens. Suddenly there's a wide open space where the old dynamic used to exist. There's no pursuit left to resist, no closeness left to push away, no messages left to ignore. There's only silence. And silence has a peculiar way of revealing things that constant motion used to hide. This emptiness pushes them into a kind of reflection they never actually chose for themselves. They start to see the truth underneath their own behavior, to notice patterns they once flatly denied, to feel things they've spent years running from. With the distraction gone entirely, they have to face themselves head on. The discomfort intensifies once they start to realize that your silence might not be temporary at all, that this time you might not be sitting around waiting for them, that you might genuinely be done. They suddenly feel the full weight of an ending they didn't get to control, an ending they didn't choose, an ending they can't reverse using any of their usual tactics. They begin to sense that you might actually be building a life without them, that you're moving forward instead of staying stuck waiting around. And this stirs up a kind of loss they've spent their entire life trying to avoid feeling. This isn't the kind of distance they used to create intentionally as a form of control. This is real disconnection, a separation they never expected to feel this deeply. And if they allow themselves to actually feel it, instead of running from it the way they always have, this loss has the potential to push them into a crisis that forces them to finally confront the emotional wounds and defensive patterns they've spent years refusing to examine. Your absence reveals truths that your pursuit had always kept conveniently hidden. The dynamic between the two of you, your pursuit paired with their withdrawal, created a very specific emotional environment that protected them from ever having to see themselves clearly. Your pursuit let them justify their distance, let them claim they needed space because you were somehow too much, or because you weren't giving them the independence they insisted they valued. Your emotional reactions gave them convenient excuses to focus entirely on your behavior instead of examining their own. Your constant availability let them take you completely for granted, let them believe you'd always be there no matter how they treated you. But your silence strips away every single excuse, every protective layer, every illusion they used to hide behind. Without your presence there to absorb it, they can no longer blame you for their own discomfort. They're now face to face with the truth that the real issue was never actually your pursuit. It was always their fear of intimacy. When they once told you that if you just stop chasing and give them space, they'd finally show up better, they probably believed it in the moment. But now that you've stepped back completely, now that you're not chasing at all, something surprising becomes undeniably clear to them. The discomfort is still there. They still pull away. They still avoid real emotional closeness. They still struggle to show up in a vulnerable, consistent way. Their reaction stays exactly the same, even though you're no longer doing any of the things they once blamed you for. This realization, if they're honest enough with themselves to actually sit with it, exposes a truth they never wanted to admit. Their behavior was never something you caused. Their patterns exist because of internal wounds they've never actually healed, not because of anything you personally did. You were never the trigger. You were the mirror. Your absence also reveals the genuine value you brought into their life, value they were completely blind to simply because it was always available and never had to be earned. While you were present, while you cared, while you tried, while you understood them in ways nobody else seemed to, they dismissed all of it. They fixated on what they perceived as your demands, instead of noticing the emotional support you were freely offering. But now that you're no longer there, they feel the empty space where your presence used to be. They notice how strangely quiet their life has become without your voice, your insight, your affection, your steadiness. They start to see that you brought warmth, grounding, understanding, and emotional depth that isn't easy to find replicated elsewhere. And the people they start meeting now don't offer that same understanding. They don't match the depth you gave them. They don't make them feel truly seen the way you once did. Your absence makes it painfully obvious that you were never actually replaceable. They assumed they could easily find someone simpler, someone less intense, someone who wouldn't ask them for real depth. But now that they're actually trying, they're discovering that what you offered was genuinely rare. You weren't demanding, you were devoted, and devotion isn't something easy to come by. Your silence also exposes a pattern they've been avoiding their entire life. While you were around, they could tell themselves that every failed relationship ended because of the other person's flaws, because of incompatibility, because they simply hadn't found the right match yet. They never had to see that the exact same pattern kept repeating itself over and over. Strong connection forms, closeness rises, emotional fear kicks in, withdrawal follows, distance grows, and then it ends. Different partners, but the same exact story every single time. But once you step away and they have no one left to blame, that truth becomes much harder to ignore. They are the common thread running through every single one of these relationships. They are the one who withdraws every time real intimacy starts to deepen. They are the one who avoids emotional vulnerability, and this realization stings because it removes the illusion that their behavior is somehow normal, natural, or harmless. Your silence reveals something even deeper underneath all of this. Their avoidance was never actually a lifestyle preference. It was protection, plain and simple. They framed it as independence, as freedom, as healthy boundaries. But now that they finally have all the space they claim to want, it doesn't feel like freedom at all. It feels like loneliness. It feels like emptiness. It feels like the exact isolation they've spent their whole life trying not to feel. They used to insist they preferred being alone, but now they're discovering that being alone only ever felt comfortable when someone like you remained emotionally attached to them in the background. Now that you're gone, they're realizing that what they called independence was really fear wearing a disguise. Your absence also exposes something they once flatly denied about themselves. They are actually capable of putting in effort. They can text consistently. They can plan ahead. They can show genuine interest. They can try, but apparently only when they're with someone who doesn't make them feel emotionally exposed. They used to claim they simply couldn't show up for you, but the real truth is they chose not to, because the depth of your connection triggered old wounds they weren't ready to face. And when they eventually catch themselves putting in real effort for someone new, it forces a painful realization. The issue was never about their limitations. It was about their fear of real intimacy with someone who actually mattered to them. And now they're beginning to see how their defensive behavior didn't only hurt you, it hurt them just as much. They protected themselves from vulnerability, but in doing so, they also blocked themselves off from real love. They kept themselves safe, but they also kept themselves lonely. They avoided emotional risk, but in the process, they also avoided emotional fulfillment. And losing you shows them the true cost of those defenses. They didn't just lose a partner, they lost someone who genuinely cared, someone who tried, someone who wanted to build something meaningful with them, someone who saw them deeply, someone who loved them in ways they never quite knew how to receive. Whether this realization actually leads them to real change is something only time will reveal. The most important question about whether an avoidant person truly understands their patterns because of your silence comes down to whether that understanding turns into genuine long-term change, or whether it simply stays as surface-level awareness that never actually transforms into new behavior. Real change is not the same thing as recognition. Plenty of avoidant individuals become fully aware of their own tendencies and yet continue acting in exactly the same ways regardless. Knowing this can help protect your expectations so you don't end up pulled back into situations that hurt you all over again. Understanding alone does not replace the deep work required for genuine transformation. Avoidant defenses were built up over years, and they live inside the nervous system, not just inside conscious thought. Real change in avoidant patterns demands far more than simple insight. It requires ongoing therapeutic work with a professional who genuinely understands attachment issues. These patterns typically developed during childhood and were reinforced through adult relationships, shaping exactly how the avoidant person reacts to closeness and emotional pressure. You cannot dissolve these automatic reactions through sheer willpower or temporary motivation alone. It requires steady, guided work to retrain their automatic responses, to increase their tolerance for closeness, and to build healthier coping strategies that don't rely on shutting down, withdrawing, or creating distance. Many avoidant people never actually begin this kind of work because it feels deeply uncomfortable, costs money, and demands a level of vulnerability they've spent their whole life trained to avoid. Real change also depends heavily on whether the avoidant person genuinely wants to grow, rather than simply wanting to escape the temporary discomfort created by your absence. If their motivation to change is purely about winning you back or soothing their own loneliness, that motivation tends to fade once the emotional tension eventually settles down. Many avoidant people experience a sudden burst of clarity when they're afraid of losing someone they promise themselves they'll change this time. But those promises tend to dissolve once they find someone new who temporarily fills their emotional emptiness, or once enough time passes that they simply forget the pain that pushed them towards self-reflection in the first place. Transformation requires far more than a single emotional shock. Change also demands actual practice inside real relationships. Even with therapy and genuine motivation behind them, avoidant patterns only shift through repeated situations where intimacy triggers anxiety and they consciously choose to stay present instead of shutting down. Those choices then need to be reinforced by positive outcomes that directly contradict their old belief that closeness always equals danger. This kind of shift cannot happen in isolation. It requires a relationship where they deliberately choose to act differently whenever they feel triggered. But this remains risky because they might simply repeat their old habits with the new person instead, and most avoidant people don't openly tell a new partner that they're actively working through attachment issues. The chances that recognition alone leads an avoidant person into genuine, lasting change are honestly fairly low. Research on attachment patterns shows that avoidant individuals often relieve their discomfort through distraction rather than actual transformation. When they feel the sting of losing you, they might reflect on it briefly, but instead of doing the hard internal work required, they often start engaging with someone who hasn't yet learned to set boundaries or respond with silence the way you did. This new person allows them to slide right back into familiar patterns. They might insist they've changed, or that this time will be different, but without structured support and repeated practice, the same old patterns usually resurface again and again. Some avoidant people genuinely do change, but they tend to share certain common conditions when they do. They reach a point where the cost of their behavior can no longer be ignored, whether that's driven by age, loneliness, the loss of someone they truly valued, or the repeated failure of similar relationships over time. They finally recognize that the common denominator is their own pattern, not the people they keep dating. They also gain access to therapy and actually attend consistently, rather than just saying they'll go someday. They accept the discomfort that comes with real change instead of quitting the moment it becomes emotionally heavy. And they surround themselves with people who genuinely hold them accountable. If an avoidant person eventually returns after a period of silence, telling you they now see their patterns clearly and want another chance, your responsibility is to look for real, tangible evidence of change rather than simply accepting their insight as sufficient proof on its own. The practical questions matter most here. Have they actually been in regular therapy for a meaningful stretch of time? Can they describe specific skills they're actively learning, along with real moments where they caught themselves repeating an old habit and chose a different response instead? Are they approaching you with patience, steadiness, and genuine respect for how long it takes to rebuild trust? Or are they leaning on urgency and grand promises because they want to jump straight back into closeness without doing any of the actual work required? Your strongest form of protection is remembering that their recognition, no matter how sincere it might feel in the moment, does not obligate you to return, to wait, or to open that door again. Your life, your healing, and your emotional well-being come first, always. If they genuinely change through months or years of real, consistent effort, and if their actions consistently demonstrate that they've developed new capacity, and if you happen to be open to reconnecting at that point in time, then it might be something worth considering. But shaping your entire life around the mere possibility that they might change someday only keeps you trapped in a story that ultimately harms you. Your silence created a moment where the avoidant person could finally see their own patterns with total clarity. Whether that insight becomes the seed of real transformation, or whether it simply fades as they repeat the same patterns with someone new, is entirely up to them now. Your silence has already done its job. It removed the noise and the excuses that once blocked their self-awareness from ever surfacing. What happens next belongs to them, not to you. Your responsibility now is to keep moving forward with your own healing, trusting that stepping away from a dynamic that hurt you was the right decision all along. You acted with clarity by refusing to keep participating in patterns that were causing you harm. Now your path leads toward relationships with people who already possess the emotional capacity to show up consistently, to stay present through discomfort, and to build the kind of intimacy that grows stronger over time instead of collapsing under pressure. Your silence opened up space for the truth to surface. Their choices determine what happens with that truth. Your choices determine the life you walk into next.